Congressman Jerry Litton believes that a democracy depends on informed people. He also believes our government should be more open and accessible to the people. To better inform you of what is happening in your government, Missouri's 6th District Congressman Jerry Litton invites Washington personalities to come to Missouri each month and join him in an unrehearsed, question and answer, open to the public town meeting to discuss key issues facing our nation. Dialogue with Litton brings you closer to your government and Washington closer to you.
You know, one of the things that's always bothered me since I've been involved in politics, every 4 years it seems that as we near the time of election for the President of the United States, we sit back and watch 2 or 3 men propel themselves up into a high consideration for the office of President. And then the parties pick from among these 2 or 3 people. And I've always thought that our parties ought to take a broader look at all of the people in the party, to look at more people for the highest office in the land. And we have many that are deserving. And I think it was with this in mind that some 35 to 40 members of Congress went to our guest early this year and suggested that he consider running for president. They asked for him to travel around the country and let people get to know him. And they did it not because they looked upon him as a man who might sell on television, but because they knew him as a most effective legislator, a man who writes law. Give a good Missouri welcome to Congressman Mo Udall.
Sports fans and fellow taxpayers and Democrats and Republicans and Missourians and all of that. I had fun moving around the hall here today, meeting so many fine people. There were a couple of Republicans there, Jerry, and I'm glad to see that because we need a good two-party system, a strong, courageous Democratic Party and a weak, pusillanimous Republican Party. I remember this old story. Presidents didn't always have a sense of humor. Haven't always had. Franklin Roosevelt did, and he used to tell the story that some of you old-timers will remember back in the 30s. This fellow took his father down to church one morning, and the old man was very deaf and very old and very reactionary, and the son said, "Dad, come over here. I want you to meet the new deacon." The old man scowled and said, "New dealer." And the kid said, "No, Dad, new deacon. He's the son of the bishop." And the old man grinned and he said, "That's right, they all are. They all are." Well, whatever your persuasion, I'm proud to participate in this affair today and look forward to the questions, friendly and unfriendly and all of that. Jerry Litton and this program are 2 of my most favorite developments in recent times because I started this school for freshman congressmen, and I see them come along, several hundred now, and this is one of the very finest. And don't let anybody kid you that the system won't work. We are the system. We are the government. Back in Watergate, it was Jeb Magruder, or one of them, in his book said, "Oh, we thought we could get away with one burglar on the White House payroll. After all, we were the government." Well, they were not the government. You're the government, all of us, Democrats and Republicans. And government's going to work. If this exciting new forum that none of the rest of us had enough ingenuity to dream up, if things like this can be carried on around the country. So I'm proud to be here with you today. It's a great occasion for me, and we'll try to field your questions here as we go along. I've been telling this old story about the little guy who goes to this Missouri town, and I really will quit, and he makes a speech, and he said, "Now, ladies and gentlemen, them's my views, and if you don't like them, well, then I'll change them."
Let me say, I've been around Mo just long enough to know that he doesn't change them very easily. Microphone left and right over here, yes.
Today, this country is in the throes of economic recession and at the same time runaway inflation. If you were president, how would you attack this problem?
If I were president, we'd be moving on it with the best brains I could find and people like Jerry Litton. 2 or 3 quick points. Don't let anybody kid you that there's any easy answer to this. This isn't the kind of inflation we've had before where you cut taxes and stimulate the economy. This is worldwide. You used to have inflation in France, but not in Germany, and vice versa. This has some basic underlying consequences, causes. The end of the era of cheap oil, the fact that the world is running out of farm production and farmland, a whole new ball game, the fact that we're going into an era of scarcities. The world's going to have to adjust to this. And we're going to have to do some kind of fundamental things that Franklin's of a different sort. But that Franklin Roosevelt, the businessmen didn't like him, the Chamber of Commerce, but he saved the free enterprise system by the changes we made in the 30s. And I suspect we're going to have to look at this economic system, to keep in mind the basic principles of competition that make it work, and find some answers. I can give you a laundry list of things that I'd start doing right away. We've got a jawbone. We've got to have fair taxes in this time. We've got to have price controls if needed, wage and price controls on those concentrated industries where you don't have any competition. You know, a lot of these big oil companies run ads about competition. They wouldn't know it if they saw it on Wall Street. They don't have any competition in the big concentrated industries.
And I think one of the reasons that we got into the dilemma that we were in last year was an awful lot of people just simply didn't understand economics. And many of them were pursuing economic policy that was more counterproductive than productive. And if we do nothing but convey to the American people some of the reasons why inflation occurs and what makes it happen, and some of the ins and outs of economics, I think we'll be better able to deal with it as a people. You're always afraid of those things you don't understand. And if we can create a better understanding of economics, at least that's the first step. And as Mo said, there's no easy answer.
The Congress has been concerned about usurpation of power by the presidency and Supreme Court treading into their area. I'm thinking of, is the Congress also treading on the toes of state government by blackmailing type of legislation? A case in point, the highway, some of the highway bills. We had the Highway Beautification Act. Congress says you don't comply, you don't get your federal money. We have a 55-mile-an-hour speed limit. If you don't comply, you don't get your money.
Tough question. I think it's a basic question, too. You know, I don't think that the federal government really has any purpose except to do those things that a state can't do. A state really has no purpose except to do those things that a city can't do. And I don't think that a city has any purpose other than to do what individuals by themselves can't do. So I think we have to take a look at what point can a state handle its own problems without the federal government stepping in and telling them what they should or should not do. Now, you're absolutely right about blackmail, but I think it's a matter of using a carrot or a club. I don't think any of us would want the federal government to dictate to the state government what they can or can't do. I don't think we would want the federal government to come in and say, you will do this, you will have certain speeds, you will do all of these various things. Instead, I think the federal government comes along with a carrot and says you don't have to, but it would be economically desirable if you did. So perhaps it's a matter of simply using a carrot instead of a club. And if I'm to choose between the two, I'll take the carrot. But I want to make sure before the carrot's out there that the federal government is asking the states to do those things that the states can't do by themselves.
Well, Jerry's expressed my philosophy, and we're having a renaissance of state and local governments. In fact, in this presidential business, one of the encouraging signs is that some governors at long last are going to be looked at in '76.
I'd like to direct my question toward inflation. It would seem like to me that it's generally conceded that the major cause of inflation is too easy credit, we're spending too much. And my observation has been the worst offender is our government in deficit spending. And I would like both you gentlemen to comment on deficit spending. Would you reduce it? What is your answer?
Well, I personally think we've all got to cut back. I'm for balancing the budget as a help in the fight on inflation. But I don't think we ought to kid ourselves that this is the kind of inflation that we've had in the past where action by the government alone by itself was going to cure the problem. There are some other difficulties, some other aspects of this problem that have got to be handled too. And also on budget cutting, I would make this qualification. If we're going to cut, we're going to cut across the board. Everybody's going to share the cuts, and it's going to include the defense budget. You know, we had 500,000 people in Vietnam, bring them all home. We settle our problems with China, and a lot of the military was for that. We have détente with the Russians. I'm a taxpayer. I look at the defense budget and say, gee, this is great, generation of peace. I wonder how much the defense budget is down. It isn't down, it's up. It costs more for the defense in real dollars. It costs more in a generation of peace than it cost when we had the Cold War on. So I think we can balance the budget, but I think fat ought to come out of the defense budget just as well as health and education and daycare centers and a lot of other things.
I think we have to look, too, at the fact that inflation is caused by a different set of factors, I think, in our country this year than normally we think of inflation. We've had a situation with the energy crisis where oil cost more, not simply because the cost of producing it went up, but just the people who were in control of it decided to produce less of it and asked more for it. We saw the price of food go up. Again, not so much for the production cost, but simply the fact that there wasn't enough to go around. We had bad weather, we had bad crop year all over the world. So we're working with an entirely different set of factors than we've worked with before. We have a scarcity of key essential products, energy, food, those things everybody has to buy. Now, this doesn't mean that we can't look at the normal ideas of cutting the budget and live within our spending, because I think we should, but I don't think that we can look at that as the only aspect of it, because it's not the only part of it.
Mr. Litton, as a Democrat, I would like to thank you for the fine job you're doing.
Thank you.
That's the kind of question I like to get out home, too.
I must say that in all the years, this is the first opportunity I've ever had to talk to a man that I've elected. I appreciate the answers to some of the letters that you have sent me. At least I get the impression that you've read the letters and not your secretary.
You're right.
The second thing, as a member of the Trans World Airlines, we hear subsidy. The Star says, the government says subsidy for the airlines is a no-no. Well, I can go along with this, but I ask you this question. The oil depletion allowance, the oil tax write-off that the oil companies get, if this isn't subsidization, what is?
I just can't find it in my heart to believe that we ought to subsidize any company, because most certainly if a company cannot continue to be competitive, then all we do by subsidizing it is let it stay there and operate at a loss. I think certainly there's going to be some answers sought with TWA and Pan Am, changes in the lines and routes that they have so that they're more competitive than they are now, or so that they're not losing money with every flight that they take. I'll say one other thing that I think we need to take a look at. Right now, foreign governments are charging us anywhere from 5 to 10 times as much to land our planes on their airports as we charge them to land on our airports, and I think that's wrong. I think that ought to be changed. And I think it's also wrong that we permit some of the foreign governments to buy airplanes at subsidized interest rates cheaper than our airlines buy them here in this country. I think that ought to be changed. But I think these are better solutions to the problem than subsidy of the airlines. You know, I was thinking back on this question that the gentleman asked over here, and I want to make a point on it because many people do write in, and I suppose 5% of the mail I get starts out with the opening sentence, "I don't suppose anyone will ever read this letter."
Yeah, I have the same experience.
And it bothers me to think that I'm taking all that time to read a letter and they really didn't expect me to read it anyway. But,
well, Jerry, I think people ought to know this. I read every single letter that comes into my office, and he does, and I think people don't believe this.
Congressman Litton, as you're going to introduce some new legislations or try to find out about how much these foreign governments owes the United States, are you going to follow this and really make them come back and pay their honest debts as we have to in America?
I'm afraid by the time the American government finally figures out who owes us and how much, our dollars will have devalued to such an extent that it won't take much to pay it off.
The Americans are a generous people, and we've tried since World War II to help other countries, hoping that we were helping ourselves by making them stronger. There's a lot of disillusionment with foreign aid, and I share that disillusionment. I share it particularly, and you must realize that foreign aid, both military and economic, has been cut drastically back from what it was. It's really a very tiny, small program by comparison with what we had before. But when I look around, you know, an economist told me last week, he said, suppose that a bunch of Arab sheiks arrived in Washington and said, we hereby hold a gun at the head of the Congress and we are imposing a $15 billion annual tax on the American people. You would say this is outrageous, can't do it, unconstitutional. Well, that's what they've done. We will be sending out of this country $15 billion in extra oil revenues to foreign governments this year. We thought we were off the hook, you know, a year ago when this fuel crisis started, we weren't going to be dependent on foreign oil. I checked this out last week, and we are more hooked on foreign oil today than we were a year ago. It's gone from 34% to 37 or 38% imports of oil. And we can't afford to be spending a lot of money on foreign aid or other programs till we get our own house in order.
One thing I think we need to do, and I'm just as concerned about helping others as anybody, but I think we need to take a good long look at all of our foreign aid, where it goes, and ascertain whether or not the people that are getting our money are doing their share and are meeting their responsibility to solve the same problem they're asking us to help them with. Good example. About a month and a half or 2 months ago, we had the World Population Control Conference that was held. And many countries, most particularly those such as India, which always have a handout to us, palm up or help, went on record as opposing any efforts on the part of the American government to pursue a worldwide program to try to hold population within check. At the same time, the governments of India went on record of opposing that kind of an approach. They also took a slap at the American consumer and said that you people were eating too well and eating too much, and suggested that the American farmers were not producing enough. And it's been my position that if some of the leaders of some of these countries of the world would have been as successful in their efforts to hold population in check as the American farmers have to increase their production, there would be no world hunger. Now, I think we need to take a look and suggest to other countries that they're going to have to meet their responsibility too. And I think our foreign aid ought to be predicated on need, number one, and number two, on whether or not the countries receiving the aid are doing their part to solve their problem. Period.
I'm Henry Worst from Kansas City. And Jerry, as a Republican, I want to thank you for answering all of my letters, which you do very religiously. And although as you know, I have not agreed with all of your votes, I think that you're honest and you are hardworking, and I'm for you. Now, in regard to inflation, both of you have skirted an idea, but I'd like to see if you care to comment on it a little bit more. The idea that too many of us, that's us, including people on the government payroll, have been trying to eat so high on the hog, so much higher on the hog every year for so long that we run out of hog.
Well, he's right, and we all agree. We can cut back in federal employment. There's waste and fat in the federal budget, and you've constantly got to dig it out. You've constantly got bureaucrats, and they're in every administration trying to increase the number of employees.
We do have to consider, too, take a look at total production in this country. And we're buying more things than we're selling, and you just simply can't do that for very long and keep this country in the black. We had a deficit in trade of $2 billion in 71, of $6 billion in 72, or 72 and 73. And last year, we were in the black about $1.5 billion. We fell into the red $1.1 billion last month alone. So at some point, we're going to have to start producing more than we're buying. And maybe it's an attitude of all the American people that we're interested in leisure and luxury and convenience and time off rather than time on. And at some point in time, we're going to have to turn our attention toward the ideas of producing some commodities and some goods and some services if we're going to keep this country in the black. And it's an attitude. and hopefully it can be changed.
You know, that triggers something I wanted to say here, too. It's good for a country or a person or a family to try a little bit of economy and leanness and thrift now and then. And we've been kind of fat, dumb, and happy and lazy, and we had everything going well for us these last years.
Can we, will we, and should we use food as a weapon in any worldwide economic war that may develop?
I don't think you really can. I'm not. If we get our backs to the wall, we may have to do a lot of things we wouldn't like to do. But I thought they were kind of pointing an unloaded gun when they suggested to the OPEC countries that if they didn't drop the price of oil, that somehow we were going to be able to hurt them. The fact is they hold most of the cards and we don't. You know the only card we've got? The only card we've got is to really get independent of these foreign sources.
I think the only thing that we do have is that those countries, the Arab countries, are frightened to death of the possibility of being taken over by communists and by communism. They're very much afraid of the communist possibilities and prospects. And I might add that that was the one card that we held during the peace talks, is that they didn't like us, but they liked us a whole lot better than they liked the Russians. And I think that's an important factor. I think we also have to keep in mind that the Arabs decided one day, as they looked around their great expanse of land, that all they had besides oil was sand. And there wasn't much of a market for sand. And they decided that there had to be some long-range plans to take care of their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren. And obviously the plan they came forward with was to raise the price of the product they were selling, to produce less of it, to make it last longer. And I think that we're up against a hard, cold economic facts of life. As Mo here said, what we're going to have to do is A, use less of it in the short run, and B, become self-sufficient in the long run so we don't have to be dependent upon that part of the world.
Interest and everything else went down under wage and price controls, and the economy went up, and everything was lovely until they let loose a phase 2, as far as I'm concerned.
Mo addressed that subject a little earlier today, do you?
Well, I don't think we ought to duck this question. I don't think we ought to duck it at all. And I believe in this free market system, and it works when you've got competition. And I pointed out earlier, you know, the cattlemen here, prices dropped, what, 30, 40% on the hoof? And consumers say, well, that's too bad for the cattlemen, but by golly, we're going to the store this week, and I want to see how much steak is down, and ground beef. And you look in the counter, they're not down at all. You know, something's going wrong. And the drug industry is concentrated. It takes 4 cents to make a little pill that your mother needs for arthritis, and they sell it to you for 80 cents. There's no competition in drugs. And what I've been advocating is that maybe we can't make a price and wage control system work in the billions of little economic decisions in a free economy, although it did work in World War II and Korean War fairly well. But you could make a beginning, and the beginning would be in those concentrated industries where there is no competition. And you could, with a very small staff, very easy to monitor. It doesn't cost very much, no trouble to find out some of these concentrated industries, what they're charging, what U.S. Steel is doing, and this kind of thing. So I don't think the politicians ought to shy away from wage and price controls. We ought to take a look at them, and if that's what's needed, we ought to do it. This economic plan 1, 2, 3, and 4 might have worked if it had been handled by some people who believed in it. These people didn't believe in it. They put it on. They took it off. We had phase 3.5, 9.5. Nobody knew what was going on. If somebody had said, brothers and sisters, here's the plan. It's going to work, and here's the way it's going to go, we might have had a much better result.
I detect, I think, a little bit of difference of opinion between you and Congressman Litton. Maybe I'm assuming things that I shouldn't. But we heard Congressman Litton repeatedly tell us how bad wage and price controls were for agriculture, and I'm wanting to know how in the world you can justify wage and price controls for concentrated industries. I assume the big oil companies, U.S. Steel, these conglomerates, and not apply it to agriculture. It would seem to me that if you're going to apply it to one, you're going to have to apply it to all.
I don't think, Mark, you'll find that much of a difference, really. Take a look at it for just a moment. I've always been opposed to government involvement and wage and price controls in a free enterprise system. Now, let's look at what the Congressman has said and what I've always said, and you mentioned agriculture. There's a law that's probably better than any we've written in Congress called the law of supply and demand. Now, that law works provided there's easy access to the market. provided people can get in and produce that product if the price is up and the demand is for it and the profit is high. More people can get into that area, produce more of the product, the price comes down, and that's the good old free enterprise system. Now, when you have 3 million farmers all over the land, there's ready access into the market. People can get into the dairy business today, they can get out tomorrow. When the prices go up, they can get in. When they go down, they can go out. But when you have 7 or 8 oil companies that control the majority of oil of this country, you and I can't get into the oil business tomorrow and get out the next day. There's not that kind of ready access to the law of supply and demand. So what he has suggested is that we take a look at possible controls, if need be, in those big areas where competition does not really exist as such. I'll buy that. But where there is competition, then I think that we should not have it.
And I'll buy that.
Look, let me propose this to you then for your reaction. Instead of wage and price controls, why not some trust busting of these major oil companies to make them more competitive?
There is no excuse for oil being controlled vertically from the wellhead to the corner gas station. You ought to bust up so you had independent refiners competing against each other, and we ought to do that in a lot of other areas, and that would help to drive prices down and fight inflation as much as anything I can think of.
I'll buy that.
That's a good, sound Republican doctrine.
Jim Josnell. One of the problems, of course, that we have is with the Arab world. As you well know, the Arabs are taking in approximately $100 billion a year in income. In 2 years, they can control the New York Stock Exchange, own it, everything, every share of stock. Does the government have any, does the Congress have any thoughts to this end in the manner of preventing this type of takeover?
I introduced a bill which would establish a commission to monitor foreign investments in this country. And I don't think that we could consider at this time, in view of the fact that we invest so much more heavily in other countries around the world than they invest in this country, I don't think we could consider precluding them from making investments in this country. But I think we do need to monitor the investments that are being made. I think we need to know where they are, and I don't think we ought to wake up someday and find out that a foreign power has control over a major important resource or asset or business or industry in this country. But as long as we're monitoring it, as long as we know where the money is, then I think we can act in a responsible fashion if we find that it's getting out of line with what is in our best interest.
Well, I agree, and this shows you the breadth of this guy. People think of him, Jerry came there as kind of a rural congressman who knew a little bit about agriculture, and this shows you how quickly, the range of his interests and how quickly he grasps a lot of very complicated things. I agree with that. But this underlines again that the long-term solution for this country is energy independence, permanent renewable sources of energy. It underlines the importance of energy conservation. If year by year we are more and more hooked on foreign oil, and that's the direction we're going, year after year we are in more danger of exactly the kind of thing you're putting your finger on there.
I want to thank everybody for coming here, and most particularly I want to thank Congressman Mo Udall for taking time out of his very busy schedule to be with us. He was in Indiana, Illinois, and Oklahoma, I think, in the last 48 hours. And he's running a very busy schedule. We want to thank him for taking the time to be with us here in Missouri. I do want to say that the program portion of this meeting is open to the public, and we hope you join us each month, either in person or on the some 20-plus television and radio stations around the Midwest that are carrying Dialogue with Litton. We hope you come back next month and join us when we again bring government back to the people. Thank you.
You have been watching Dialogue with Litton. Jerry Litton believes that government should be open and accessible to the people, that people should have a say in their government. That's what Dialogue with Litton is all about. Be sure to continue to watch it on this station.